Hi, I'm Paul Wagonseal with Cyber Risk Alliance, and we're here at Identiverse, and I'm interviewing Mark Batchelor, who's the CTO and co-founder of Vericent. Now, Mark, can you tell me what Vericent does?
Yeah, absolutely. So Vericent is a fraud intelligence platform for account fraud detection. Specifically, if you think about fraud in general, a lot of the marketplace for the last 2 decades or so has focused on payment fraud, right? So much so that people have built business models around it. They bake chargebacks and things like that into their business model, right? We're a bunch of ex-identity veterans, and for us, it turns out that the account, if you can get into the account, you're going to commit chargeback fraud. That it starts with the account. So we built in a fraud intelligence platform that effectively integrates with your application directly or your identity provider to provide fraud signaling in real time as someone logs in or as they commit a high-value identity event in order to orchestrate an outcome for things like, should they MFA the user, should they KYC the user, should they, that type of thing. So that's kind of how we got our start. Honestly, we've been around for a little over 3 years at this point, and we didn't know how to explain what it was we were doing for a while. Lucky for us, the analysts out there decided that we were a fraud intelligence platform.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you I'm going to ask you some dumb questions here, but just in case people aren't familiar, what is a chargeback fraud?
Oh, chargeback fraud. At the end of the day, we don't do chargeback fraud, right? But at the end of the day, it's whenever somebody steals a credit card number, for example, and they use it to go buy something, and the credit card company says, we guarantee that you won't have any fraud, right? Somebody has to pay for that thing somebody stole. That's a chargeback, right? And so it's built into all sorts of business models, and there are a ridiculous number of vendors that help with chargeback fraud. We want to sit a layer above that and work on account fraud.
So in other words, the vendor usually has to eat the cost if there's a chargeback.
Yeah, the vendor, somebody somewhere, it's either the vendor, the credit card company, the payment processor, somebody eats that cost, and it's in billions, I believe.
And for people who don't know, what is KYC?
Oh, know your customer.
Right up.
All right, so KYC, good question, by the way. So for know your customer, one of our core beliefs when we started the company was that there's all the way here on the left side, you've got just usernames and passwords, and I'm going to authenticate somebody and let them in, and I'm not going to care who they are. They knew the password, they get in, right? That's kind of been the status quo for a really long time. Over here, you've got KYC, right? And for KYC, I'm going to run you through a selfie check, and I'm going to scan your passport. I'm going to look at a document. I'm going to make sure they match up, right? It's a good indicator that the person really is who they say they are. Deep fakes, of course, are changing that a little bit. But it's also super high friction. And because of it, it's mostly been used in regulated industries like banking, right? That kind of thing. More and more sort of normal companies are starting to use it, but still it's high friction. So one of our core beliefs is that there's something in the middle, right, that you can do to decide whether or not this is likely the person you're supposed to be working with or the person you think they are without going full KYC. And that's one of the things that our platform does.
So you're trying to find a happy medium.
Something in the middle.
Great. Okay.
Now, good question.
Now, how would you define account platform fraud, and can you provide some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So platform fraud, the way we sort of define it is a super boring way to say it is terms of service abuse, right? So think for example, here's just a generic example. Let's say I've got a platform where eBay, well, it's not that generic, but let's say I've got eBay, right? And I'm a seller and I'm trying to sell you something, and I don't ship it to you, for example. That's platform fraud, right? I'm using the platform to game other people that are also on the platform, right? Happens all the time in places where people, where you connect consumers to other consumers, or you connect businesses to consumers. So, the Airbnb stories where I show up and it's not what I thought it was, that kind of thing, right? So that's platform fraud. It's I'm not committing credit card fraud. I'm not committing raw fraud, but what I am doing is I'm using a platform against what the platform was intended to be used for to defraud other people on the other side of the platform.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So in other words, for example, we have a lot of social media companies that are now have selling, marketplaces built into them.
Oh,
as
sure.
Sort of an
Yeah,
afterthought.
Facebook Marketplace, that kind of thing. Sure.
And I'm sure it's probably more rife with that kind of fraud than maybe even eBay is, because eBay's better,
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And another example, let's say that I sell sneakers, for example, and I'm going to trade them to you, and you're going to buy them from me, but you're also going to put money on top of those sneakers because you want them really bad, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's say that I'm going to use the platform to launder money. So I'm going to put up a pair of volleys from the 80s that are pieces of junk and list them as Jordans or something.
Right.
And then you're going to come along and stack $200 on top of it. I'm going to get that $200. Well, you just laundered that money. Right. You used the platform to launder money, and that's not what it was intended for, right? Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, in your opinion, what are some of the most troublesome type of account platform fraud? Troublesome types, that is, and what makes them so hard to prevent?
Yeah, so troublesome types. Well, certainly there's the money laundering type stuff, but when you boil it all down to it, right? It gets really simple. It's complex, but the problem is simple. It's the person on the other end isn't the person they say they are, right? Or the person on the other end has given their credentials to somebody else to do something, right? Or it's as simple as their credentials were stolen somewhere else and somebody else acting like them, right? That's what we do, is we detect whether or not this is likely that actual person. And that's... I know everybody wants to talk about things like deep fakes and AI and all that kind of stuff, but there's so much more simple stuff out there, low-hanging fruit that really helps solve the problem, that I think is what, where we should go with it.
You don't need AI voice replication if you just have someone who does good imitation. A good impression.
Sure. Well, that, and it's oftentimes the person that is committing that, deep fake or whatever it's going to be, something about them doesn't look normal from what the original user was, right? So user behavior matters. And if you're not following their behavior over time, you can't tell when they break bad, right? So for us, it's all about figuring out when somebody breaks bad, even if they look like the same person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
Well, which leads to the next question. I mean, we've seen, new technologies come along. I mean, are there new tactics to go with those technologies, or is it just basically replicating the same old thing?
Oh, yeah, of course there's new tactics. There's always new tactics.
Okay.
There's probably 50 new tactics today, somewhere along the way. But so everybody says that AI is going to help in this space, and we certainly use it. Everybody does, right?
Sure.
But AI, the bad guys already have it, and they're way ahead of us, right? They're way ahead of the entire industry on whether or not they'll use it for whatever they want at this point, right? So I think what probably really happens, in my opinion, is that the tactics probably don't get more technical. They probably don't get more advanced, but they probably become more of them, right? Because now some kid in his basement somewhere in Europe can just tell AI, go write me a bot that does credential stuffing against this website, right? It's a super simple attack, right? But I think more of them is where it starts first before it gets super...
It's lowering a threshold in a way.
Because, like I said before, I think everybody's worried about deep fakes, and they all talk about it, and it's a thing.
It sounds sexy.
It sounds super sexy, and I agree it's really a thing, and it will be a thing. But at the moment, I'm more worried about the kid in his basement that got ChatGPT to write him a bot that could credential stuff some website. You know what I mean? I think there's going to be more of that in the near term.
Yeah, it's scary how easy it is to do that. I try to do it, I was writing a story about it, and I'm like, okay, let's see what we can do.
I've even done it. I use it all the time.
It's like, it doesn't give you the whole thing, but it gives you 2 or 3 different parts.
Get you close
Put
enough.
them together,
Yep.
you're done.
Yep, for sure.
All right. So the next question is, what kind of guidance do you have for organizations that are trying to balance more robust fraud prevention with a seamless end-user experience?
So I think it starts with visibility,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that a lot of companies have done really well plugging their back-end systems into SIM platforms and that
Sure.
type of thing, right? But on the account side of the house, and one of the reasons we exist is identity events in particular hold a special place in the user's flow because
Sure.
A, you're interacting with the user, but B, they're high risk at the end of the day. And so I think being able to get visibly see what's happening with my application with user behavior for authentication and high value identity events, along with detecting things like account sharing and multi-account abuse and even credential stuffing. I think that's where it starts, right? Where it goes next, though, is also something we do, is getting these events, creating all this signaling, but then taking action on the signaling in real time in order to orchestrate a friction-free or the most friction-free outcome you can based on the posture of the user, right? And that's what our platform does, is ultimately based on all this signaling, I can decide what I should do next. Should I KYC them? Should I MFA them? Should I deny them access? Should I send them somewhere else, right? And it all starts with signaling and visibility.
So what kind of signals are you looking for?
Oh, we look at hundreds of signals. Signals about, just some examples, if it's an email address, for example, of course we're looking at breaches, but we're also looking at simple stuff like how old's the domain? When was it registered? Is it parked? Does it have a valid MX record or an A record? Should I even send email to it, right? We look at IP address information. We watch behavior and circadian rhythms for the user over time to figure out whether or not this particular moment in time is an anomalous event for this user, right? And so we're looking at all that type of signaling, and we build out an identity graph in the background to figure out how users are connected to other users on your platform to decide whether or not they look exactly the same. So is Mark actually Mark, or is Mark also John over here, right? That kind of thing.
Just sort of fit the same profile, in other words.
Yeah, and we've got some tech that we call signal printing that ultimately the premise is that everybody on the internet's carrying signals with them, IP address information, email information, that kind of thing. You can build hundreds of attributes about each one of those little pieces. We use those attributes to create a unique fingerprint for that user. Right. And so using signaling, we're doing fingerprinting for users.
And if you can't find that many attributes, is that itself a red flag?
Often. Matter of fact, anymore, somebody who hasn't been in a breach is often way more sketchy than somebody who's been in multiple, because it's likely they aren't a real person, right?
That's a great kind of negative filter, I guess you could say.
We use it all the time.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, if you haven't been in a breach, you're probably not a person, right? Yeah.
Okay, so looking ahead, what kind of innovations do you think are going to be happening in fraud prevention and detection in the next 5 or so years?
Yeah, look, I think with AI and with just machine learning in general, and the breadth of data we can get about these things, signaling by itself is going to take off super heavy, right? And innovations in that space, using things like identity graphs to figure out who people are, and 7 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon kind of thing, right? Is going to just get better. So I think that's a big piece of it. I also think that there's probably a future where you can integrate with a platform like ours and just put it in autopilot, right? Right now, most people wouldn't do that. Right now, they'd want to, trust but verify, right? And write their own rules. But in the future, there's probably a scenario where, look, I'm going to send you these identity event data. They're going to expect us to find the needles in the haystack, and they're going to expect our platform just to take action on them automatically, right?
So remediate things as well.
Yeah, remediate, apply friction automatically without having to know what happened first, right? There's probably a future like that. I think we're a couple years out from it. Really,
kind of a fully comprehensive detection and response system.
Right now, there's a lot of people involved in it, but I could certainly see in the future checking that box that says manage my stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that seems to be where the cybersecurity industry in general seems to be going.
Yeah,
More
100%.
consolidation, more umbrella platforms, as it were.
Yep.
So anyway, that's all the questions we have. I've been speaking with Mark Batchelor, who's a CTO and co-founder of Vericent. My name is Paul Wagenseal from Cyber Risk Alliance, and you can watch this interview and find out more about Vericent at securityweekly.com/VerocentIDV. In other words, VEROSINTIDV. Thank you very much.